Hello, welcome to another museum FAQ video. My name is Paul Orselli. I'm the president and chief instigator of POW, Paul Orselli Workshop, and I'm here on Long Island. And I'm happy to be joined today by Todd Harris. Where are you now? I see you're in the woods, at least as your background shows, but
Good morning, Paul. Yeah, this is Todd Harris, and I'm camped out, safely isolated in my office at the 42 Design Fab World Headquarters in sunny Springfield, Massachusetts.
Beautiful. So maybe we can start out, Todd. It's always interesting, I think, to give people a little context. If you could tell people a little bit about your background, and I'm especially interested in not only your current background, but your previous working world before you came to the design and fabrication world.
Sure. No, thank you. So my name's Todd Harris, and I'm the president and CEO of 42 Design Fab Studio up here in Springfield. We've been at this for about 10 years, and before that, I spent 20 years as a project management consultant. And that work involved international clients all over the world, petrochemical, law firms, Fortune 100 level clients. I worked in Europe and Canada and all over the country here, a little bit in Asia, Middle East. And during that time, it was interesting that I had worked my way, quite unintentionally, but I worked my way into a specific niche in project management, which was kind of a salvage expert. So I would often get called into projects that were really in trouble, headed for multi-million or hundreds of millions of dollars overrun. And I would be part of a project team that was just trying to minimize the damage, just trying to triage it and bring things back into a less painful state. So it gives a little bit of insight into how you face challenges like we're going through right now. Not everything translates, but there's an awful lot that does.
So mitigating disaster and multi-million-dollar things, that sounds, unfortunately, a little bit familiar, not only for the museum and cultural sector, but obviously most sectors in the world. I guess I'd be interested if you could talk a little bit about sort of two things. One is, in your previous life or in your current working life, sort of what policies and procedures and metrics, however you want to frame that, how you sort of have your plan B or plan C or plan D in place before the unexpected happens. And then also, I guess both from your previous work life and your current work life, what you do in the present and pointing towards the future once the sort of circumstance is on you. It's nice to always have 20/20 hindsight, and certainly there are things we can learn about that and plan for the future or think ahead for the next time, but also how you mitigate the kinds of problems that we're facing right now, or the kinds of situations that you were describing as it relates to your previous life. So there's two small questions there, but you can take them however you want.
Well, I think to start with, a number of folks in the museum community, friends and clients that we've known for years, have seen me present various workshops and sessions at conferences over the years on project management, on risk management in exhibit projects. And I think, in terms of things that we can do ahead of time, it's a funny role to play as a project manager to talk about risk management, because everybody wants to buy into the the rosy picture where everything goes as planned, and we like to think that we've spent a lot of time crafting this beautiful plan, and it's orchestrated meticulously, and it's all going to just happen perfectly. And in the middle of that, when everybody is feeling good, if you come out and say, hey, what if this doesn't happen right? Or what if this goes sideways? What if that grant doesn't come through? What if that object is delayed? What if the weather's bad? Any of these things. It's a hard question to ask because people don't really want you to rain on their parade. Everybody wants to buy into the sunny rainbow kind of scenario. And that's just not, it's not that we're trying to be doomsayers. It's that we're trying to imagine all of the ways that things might become problematic just so we can talk through them. And, if you've identified a risk, in many, many cases, we can say, well, this is an acceptable risk. The consequences might be high, but it really doesn't make sense to mitigate that risk because the likelihood is so low. And nobody has a crystal ball, so it's hard to imagine, for instance, what if we schedule a show next summer and in the meantime, between now and then, a global pandemic occurs? How can you possibly know that? You can't. But you can take reasonable measures to sort of look at what are the probabilities, what are the ways that things can go wrong, and are there easy things that you can do, either preventative measures, just get ahead of it, things like increased communications with a lender, increased communications with logistics folks that are involved in the exhibit, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. There's no harm in over communicating these things. If it's important, over communicate it. And in the case where things can't be prevented, then you talk about reasonable things that you might do. If it's an outdoor show and you know that there's a risk of a weather impact, are there things that you can do in terms of putting tents up or making provisions to move it indoors? Those kinds of discussions, so that that there is a plan B, and everybody on the team is aware that you're thinking that way, that, okay, we recognize there's a risk and we all kind of know the direction that we're going to go if that risk materializes. So those are, sorts of things that we can do as project managers to get ahead of it and to think about risk management and about how we can make not just a perfect project plan, but a robust project plan, something that's actually going to be workable when something doesn't, go according to plan. How do you adapt and revise?
Sure. So I guess two follow-up questions or conversational gambits that I would have. One is, I'd be really interested, and I'm sure other folks would be really interested, if there are any particular tools or software or approaches that you use that you found really helpful, and things that maybe you use that when you talk about it with other people, you're sort of surprised that other people aren't using that. So things like that. So I'd be interested in sort of specific tools and tips that you might be willing to share. But also, I'd be interested in just digging in a little deeper when you lay out this robust sort of set of project parameters, what you found helpful in terms of when you might encounter pushback for whatever reason, at whatever level, that you think is really sort of problematic pushback. If there's pushback about, not the minor things, but the major things that are in your robust project parameters. So tips and tools and how to deal with pushback.
Sure. Tips and tools, just to throw out an example, that scheduling discussions are probably the top of the list. And the simple, how many times do we hear, when's the drop dead date? This is an absolute red flag. Or when's the absolute latest I can get you that answer? When do you need that in hand? And the reason that's such a red flag is that if I give you that answer and say, I need those assets, I need that copy, I need that artifact, whatever, in hand next Tuesday, then the entire rest of my schedule is dependent on having that exactly at that time. And if anything goes wrong, there is no slack built into the schedule. And in a complicated exhibit project, there may be many dozens or hundreds of related tasks. So if one thing slips in there and your entire project plan is based on drop dead dates, then everything snowballs from there. So as a general tip, if we can try to turn those conversations around and appreciate two things, number one, you could just as easily ask the question saying, what's getting in my way of getting you that answer? How soon could I get you that answer? I understand we're all busy, right? We all have a lot of things on our plate. But when we schedule tasks out in a manner that it's all based on drop dead dates, then something will fall apart, guaranteed, absolute certainty.
Something will drop dead.
Exactly. It's just set up to fail, and that's a hard thing to do. But what you need is a degree of trust with your team, all of the players on your team, your internal folks, at your institution, and your external suppliers, folks that you're working with. It needs to be an open dialogue. Really, there's got to be a trust and say, look, if I get you this, then will that help you? Yes, absolutely it will, because we can get going on it. And the other piece of that is that many tasks have a duration that cannot be affected by throwing more effort at it. So if, for example, you say that I'm going to get you these assets in order for you to do graphic design and graphic layout, well, it's going to take a week of effort to massage all of those things and to get the drafts and to get it to you for review, regardless of when you get us the assets. So if you say you're going to have the work to us on Friday and you expect the graphic design on your desk a week from Friday, well, when your part slips 2 days, my part also has to slip. Right, and it's not just between a fabricator and a designer. It's this happens across the across the entire project web. So there are certain things that people need to understand. When is this project going to be delivered? Well, it's going to be delivered 12 weeks after you give us the green light. And people confuse that with, oh, but we really want to open on June 1st. Well, okay, but you didn't give an approval until May 1st. And we agreed it was 12 weeks out from that point. So, just understanding sort of the dependencies there is important, and being realistic about it. So that's probably the single biggest tip or trick, is to build that trust framework on your project team, have those conversations, and try to get ahead of it so that you're not setting yourself up to be reactive the entire time. So that may be some tools and tricks. And the second part of that?
Well, no, I was just going to build on that just a little bit before we talk about the problems with pushback. So are there particular tools in terms of scheduling and communication that you use either within your team or between your team and clients that you found particularly useful, whether that's, I don't know, it could be a software tool or an app or what have you, but especially on those scheduling and communication fronts, which obviously there's overlap there. So if there are any particular kinds of tools or techniques in that regard that you might be willing to share?
On the project management side, there are a number of tools out there for doing Gantt charts. Microsoft Project might be the most widely used in the project management world. That's considered a pretty low-end tool. It's not a Primavera or multi-$1,000 tool. It's readily accessible. It's a desktop tool. The important thing, regardless of what tool you're using, is that you understand the intelligence that's built into the schedule. So it's very easy to make a business graphic with bar charts, and you can make a Gantt chart in Microsoft Excel, and it's fine, except that in many cases it's simply a business graphic. There's no intelligence built into it. Meaning, if task number C slips, it's most likely going to affect D and E that come after it. And in Excel or some in Visio or any graphics package, it's easy to make that bar shorter. Not a problem, right? But if you are using a resource-loaded project management tool like a Microsoft Project or any number of other online tools that are out there, when you move that task, the dependencies are built in. That's the intelligence, and everything behind it is going to slip. So there are a couple of ways that works. Number one, the dependencies will affect downstream projects, but also number two, if the tasks are resource loaded, that that if one person is working on it and it's 40 hours of work, it's going to take a week. And there's no way to make that happen sooner except to put more effort on it. So it's still 40 hours of work no matter what. If you put 2 people on it, you may be able to get it done in 20 hours. As you increase the number of people involved in it, the efficiency usually goes down. So it's not usually a direct correlation. 2 people working 20 hours can probably not quite get the same work as 1 person working 40 hours. There's communication, there's inefficiency. But in a lot of cases, you may be able to clean a gallery. You may be able to get a gallery painted sooner by putting more resources on it. So that one painter that you have lined up may not be able to do it when you shorten their window. But if you ask, if they have additional resources they can pull in, they may be able to pull in 2 or 3 helpers, and now they can actually accomplish the task in a shorter window. So it's that business intelligence that's the really important part. And there are a whole bunch of really good tools out there in the world. We use a product called Teamwork by an Irish company. They're really, really good folks. It's not the most detailed or capable scheduling tool, but it does fairly basic things really, really well. They're easy. And the takeaway there is that if the tool is too complex and you actually don't use it, you may have a very capable tool, but you're still only putting business graphics out. So it's better to have something simpler that you know well, that you trust, that you understand how to use, and you can put out a CPM schedule, a critical path method schedule, something that has some intelligence built into it.
So maybe here in our waning moments, we can touch on sort of how you can be a project diplomat and deal with pushback, or what you might consider unreasonable pushback, or pushback that could really endanger a project. And then now that we're in this, where do we go from here? Like what once we do pop out the back end of this current COVID-19 crisis, what how do we crank the machines back up, but also not just to crank them up the way they were before, but how we could do it a little better based on all the working from home time and social distancing time that we've had to think about that. So sort of quickly, how to deal with pushback, but also where do we go from here in a sort of intelligent way?
Sure. On the pushback thing, I think the key there is that you're never going to solve pushback by pushing back harder, right? It's not an antagonistic situation. And I know that politics and relationships can be tricky, but the best way to get there is to convince everybody on the team, whether we agree or not, that we will all win if we can work together. And we may have to concede a few things here and there. So being antagonistic about it is not going to get us anywhere. So if there's somebody getting in your way, it really boils down to just having a good heart to heart and saying, look, I understand we may not agree, but I'm trying to make you look good, and I'm trying to make sure that we can all achieve a result that we're proud of and happy with. So, there's no magic to that. It's just recognize you cannot fight back harder. Digging your heels in and raising your voice is probably not going to get your point across.
Well, it's interesting though, because I think also that goes back to a word you used a couple times previously, that notion of trust. I mean, if you're forming a creative partnership, that to really trust everyone involved in that creative partnership goes a long way.
There's no question. And we go out of our way. We've been lucky to work with designers such as yourself and some fantastic clients that we've worked with over a long period of time, and that trust framework is pretty solid. When things do go sideways, and they sometimes do, we can all laugh and say, okay, let's figure this out. We got this, which is maybe a segue into the next bullet point, which is really just looking ahead, or in general, when a project does go crazy and it's not according to plan, and specifically these days, where are we at? And I think that I don't know, my gut feel is that we have to recognize what the objectives were. There's an important part of a project plan, which is having project master documents. And at the beginning, it's super helpful, even if it's on a 3x5 card, a simple paragraph, to just get your team to agree that this is what this exhibit is all about. And this is what we're trying to achieve. Because when something weird does happen, it's sometimes easy to forget that. Right? And you lose sight of priorities and you start focusing on little details. And if you have that master document, that master mission statement, so to speak, already carved out, then you can go back and refer to it and say, okay, look, we're in crazy times. We're not going to achieve the stellar perfect exhibit that we wanted to. However, we can achieve an awful lot of it. And we go back and revisit those priorities, and focus on the things that really matter or support that. So I think the second part of that is really getting to acceptance is key, right? That if we complain, if we are just despondent that it didn't go as we wanted, we're not going to hit the milestone, we're going to be late, we're going to be over budget, whatever. The complaining about it, the blaming, the scapegoating, none of it is going to fix the problem. And the sooner that we can get to a point of acceptance, the sooner we can actually look at each other and say, okay, what can you do? And what can I do? And what can they do? And how can we put those things together to paint a pretty good picture? Even if it's not a masterpiece, it'll be a pretty good picture, right? So it's this whole idea of making the best of the situation. Just stop lamenting the fact that it's not a perfect situation. It's where we are, and we have to get somewhere moving forward. We're having great discussions with clients right now that we're super grateful. People have not canceled things, but we're changing almost hour to hour what the expectations are. Okay, look, what if we opened the outdoor portion first and gained a couple more weeks to work on the indoor portion? Does that make sense? Will that meet our visitor needs? Will it meet our production needs? How can we make this all come together? And people are really pulling together to look for those answers, which is fantastic.
I think that's a great end note that applies not only to museum management, but the sort of bigger problems that the world is facing. You know, what can we all do together towards solving problems or achieving our goals? So that's great. Well, Todd, I really appreciate you taking the time today. Um, I'll look forward to the next time we can safely and legally see each other in person and work together on some new projects together.
Very good.
Thanks a lot. Take care.
Thanks so much. And, elbow bump here. Okay, be good. Stay safe.